From ICID, we welcome all the participants, President Ragab, who is presenting the webinar, and Dr. Frank Dimick, who is working group chair, and all other attendees. Today's webinar is on suitable water crops and land management for water stress region. As we all know that due to population increase, the requirement of food grain is increasing day by day, and it has to be doubled by 2050. So, and then the increased production has to come from the same quantity of water and land. So we'll have to go for better and efficient management of water, land, and crops, which is a very great challenge. How to coordinate and then how to use it in an efficient manner. So this webinar will attempt to address a number of approaches for meeting these challenges, and it will cover the following aspects: increasing water supplies through rainwater harvesting, use of non-conventional water resources, suitable and more water use efficient irrigation system and strategies, suitable crops including less water consuming and non-conventional crops, suitable land management to save water, conservation, which include conservation, tillage, mulching, precision farming, and other methods, water saving through the accurate estimation of crop irrigation requirement, use of models as management tools to save water and assess the impact of climate change on irrigation requirement, growth season, and other aspects. So this webinar is being given by our president, Dr. Ragab Ragab. I am just giving his brief profile. Dr. Ragab, he obtained his BSc in Soil and Water Sciences, MSc in Irrigation, and PhD in Rural Engineering from University of Leuven, Belgium in 1982. Presently, he is serving as Principal Hydrologist and Water Resources Management Specialist at UK Centre for Hydrology, Wallingford. As an editor at the Journal of Agricultural Sciences, he contributes to Cambridge University Press. He is also serving as an adjunct professor at Soil and Water Science Department, University of Alexandria, Egypt, since 2006. He has more than 40 years of experience in irrigation, drainage, catchment hydrology, remote sensing application in hydrology, integrated water management, climate change impact on water resources, soil, water, plant, atmosphere relations, rainwater harvesting, use of poor quality water for crop production, organic farming, and urban hydrology. Dr. Ragab is associated with many professional organizations, and he has contributed 122 to 122 selected publications, excluding reports, and he has also developed models like IHMS, SaltMed, updated version is 2019, and Hydromed. And he has received a number of global awards and recognitions for his commendable work in this sector, which include Egypt State Recognition and Merit Award for Scientific Achievements, the Barron's 500 Leaders for the New Century ICID Award for Excellence in 2002, 12, 13, and 14, and Best Paper Award in 2018. Dr. Ragab has actively contributed to ICID activities as Vice President from 2010 to 2013, and has also served as the Chairman of British National Committee of Irrigation and Drainage, and headed many ICID working groups. And we also have Dr. Frank Dimick, who is chair of working group on previously it was drought, now it is on water stressed conflicting demands. And we welcome both Dr. Ragab and Dr. Frank Dimick. All the participants, they can send their questions through question box, so that these questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. They may also raise hands if they want to discuss in person, so that if time permits, we'll allow them to speak in person also. So now I'll hand over to Dr. Ragab to give his presentation on suitable water, crop, and land management for water stress region. Dr. Ragab.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank, the chairman of the working group, for the opportunity to talk about the suitable water crop and land management for water-stressed region. My talk today will have some contents by introducing the scarcity issue and then looking for different approaches to deal with water scarcity regions. First of all, I would like to refer to water scarcity definition, which actually my shared screen is gone. I lost the share screen option.
We are able to see your PowerPoint.
Okay, but let me go again.
Yeah.
So yeah, here I was defining the water scarcity by saying the water supply is insufficient to meet the water demand, and then according to the last report of UN 2022, it refers to the fact that we have over 2 billion people living in countries where actually the physical water stress is felt at least one season per year. And we have also about 4 billion people live in areas where they actually feel the water stress at least 1 month a year, in addition to 1.6 billion people living actually and facing economic water scarcity due to the infrastructure not in the place, or the investment also not on the place. Also, the water shortage over the last really decades shows that the red regions in 1950 compared to 2000 and compared to 2025 and 2050, it shows there is expected actually a water shortage and water stress in different parts of the world as time goes by. And also, if we looked at the share of the fresh water per capita since the 1950, where per capita we had about 12,000 cubic meter, and now close to 2025, we have almost just we have only 5,000 instead of 12, and we expected to have 4,580 cubic meter per capita in 100 years time compared to the 1950, which means that it will be 1/3 of the amount of water that we enjoyed in 1950. And that's actually triggered the call by Kofi Annan that we need a blue revolution in agriculture, and we need really to increase the water productivity. We need to have more crop per crop. Add to the population increase and the increase of water abstraction is the climate change as well, and its impact on water resources. And if we look here at the expectation is that some areas in the world will have less rainfall, and that they have higher temperature. Higher temperature means high evapotranspiration, higher crop water requirements, and reduced yield. And also are expected to see some drought events and less rainfall in some areas as well. And in our work that we in a number of EU projects, we have been looking at the water supply and the demand. And the water supply and the demand here in an area in Italy shows by 2050 there's a big gap. And also we tried that in Cyprus, and we got also the same gap between supply and the demand. And then recently I just finished a project looking at different catchments inside the UK, 7 catchments from north in Scotland all the way to Cornwall, looking at also the water supply and the demand and the impact of the drought. And we found also by the end of the century 2000, and 100, that we are likely also to have a big gap between supply and demand, apart from Scotland in the north. And there are some number of publications here that you might have a look at and gain some extra knowledge. So in water stressed regions and water scarcity regions, usually you have issues related to the limited water resources, the over extraction and pollution, and also you have the increasing water demand, and that requires rational management to the resources. And rational management of the resources requires integrated water management, and that would actually look at the supply side and the demand side. And the supply side would include the surface and the groundwater and the non-conventional water resources. And the demand side, you have the high consuming demand side like the domestic agriculture industry, special agriculture, which consumes at least 70% of the fresh water, and the low consuming sectors like navigation, hydropower, aquaculture, and recreation. Also, we need to take into account we have different colors of water. The green water is the water that comes of rainfall. It is used where it falls, and usually it is at low cost. Water abstraction from rivers and lakes is labeled as blue water. And also the gray water, which is the water that comes from domestic waste and industrial waste as well. And the different approaches really to find a way to cope with less water in the water scarcity region would allow us or would direct us to increase the water supply and to use the water resources more efficiently. And I will go to the first point, how to increase the water supplies. And recently, I came across so many countries, actually more than before, started to use the cloud seedings. The cloud seedings now is practiced in so many countries. This is a picture from Mexico, where the army is doing the job, is to try to harvest the clouds by spraying the silver iodide. And also here in Karnataka in India, where this state was subject to drought in 2017, they also used that in order to solve the problem of the drought. And currently there is a research here in the UK where actually they zap the clouds by applying electric shock to the clouds and harvesting the water. Of course, there are some issues related to the cloud seeding, related to who owns the cloud. Is the human intervention to the change in the climate acceptable? And what would be the long-term impact on environment and the human health? These are some issues. Also, fog harvest is another way of increasing water supply, and that implies having those vertical mesh nets and then collecting the water that actually falls and runs across those vertical meshes. Another thing that I had a PhD student from Spain is to use condensing services, and this is dew water condensers using films or foils that would collect water from certain surfaces and harvest that water for different uses. We can also harvest the water at different scales at the roof of the houses, and also micro catchments and macro catchments. And one small project that I have been doing in the neighborhood of UKCH, looking at different houses with different aspects to the wind directions and also different apex of the roofs and flat roofs, and looked at the amount of these actually houses can harvest. And I was surprised to see that we can actually get a lot of water. Here is about 700 millimeter within a year, which is really quite a big amount of water. And if now you wanted to look at the balance of urban areas, of cities and so on, you can actually scale that up by LiDAR images, and you can have a look at the number of house types and the number of units, and then you work out how much you would actually harvest over a certain area, and how much actually also your sewage system or storm drainage system can cope with actually the runoff should you get that amount of rainfall. And there are some publications also you might look at. Also harvesting water on the top of the greenhouses. This can be actually harvested and used to grow flowers or even vegetables. And that's also another source that we could look at and increase our supply with. Another thing that I have seen in Brazil, where they use underground dams, where actually they dig a ditch and then they put plastic sheets between different sections. So they have different ditches parallel to each other, dividing the area into sections, and the water that falls between one section and another would remain within that section, no lateral movement from the right or to the left. This is what you see after that's the beginning or the preparation for the underground dam, and this is really what you see after it's done. So between actually two ditches, the water would remain and would be used by the plant during that non-rainfall period. Another thing also we're involved in the early years of 2000, it's the ZAY or pits, where we make actually a land management holes to accumulate the rain, and then we plant actually those holes with the crops or the trees. And this is example from activities in Cambodia, where also they use that system. Our work with ICID in Syria also look at the different ways of harvesting water by the land management, and this is example of them. And here is the different really methods they used to harvest water as it falls in these areas. And this is examples of how you organize your land in a way that when the water falls, it can be kept within these structures and it can be used efficiently by the trees, and it is an additional source of water. So this is really some examples of the land management. Also there is a cistern system where the water actually is kept also under the ground and then reused for irrigation and so on. So this cistern system is also in use in some arid regions, and this is really example of how they look like. And another thing is that you select at different points to recharge the aquifer, and these points could be fed by the rainfall. It also could be fed by treated wastewater. And so many countries, they started now to have artificial recharge of the aquifer using treated wastewater, and then you can actually get that water through a tunnel, and then you can use that water for different purposes. At the macro scale, actually, you know the direction of the runoff, and then you come to the point where most of the runoff actually goes to, and most of the time it is the lowest point of the catchment, which is a valley. And then you bring the agricultural activities to the lowest point where the runoff actually is reaching, and then by this you can minimize also the cost of making structures to collect and so on. So this is also can be a useful, that where you bring the agriculture to the area that's receiving the runoff. Another thing I was involved in is looking at harvesting water in the mountains of the Mediterranean countries, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, Syria, Morocco, and Tunisia. We have been looking at if we can look at the possible constructing small lakes, and this actually to receive the runoff from the mountains around. And we have been successful in that part where the community were able to come closer and to use the water and to do their social activities and agricultural activities. We developed a model there. We can calculate how much really the size of the reservoir should be. We had a probability of failure, against the volume. So we know that we have to work sometimes on designing these lakes based on the maximum observed runoff rather than the average. But also, if you wanted to reduce the size of the lake, you would like to know how much risk you are taking should you reduce the volume in order to reduce the cost of digging. So we produce that probability of failure module to allow the scientists or engineers to determine the proper size of those lakes with a percentage of success or failure. And we have been looking at different lakes and also calibrating these models in these water-stressed regions of the Mediterranean countries. There are some publications on that. Another thing to increase the water supply is agricultural drainage water, brackish groundwater use, wastewater, treated wastewater, water coming from breweries and also from farming wastes. Saline water especially is quite important because it is the most dominant type of water we have on the planet. Fresh water is only 1% and is really in a short supply. But saline water requires a good management, otherwise we'll end up having a very salinized soils, and actually this is one of the bad management picture here for using saline water without proper management. And we have been using actually this in different projects in the EU. We have been using salt tolerant crops like amaranths and quinoa, and we have been using up to 22 decimals per meter salinity for quinoa and amaranths, and we have been using about 9 even decimals for tomato to grow some crops. And this is example for mixing fresh and saline water, an experiment in Napoli, in Italy. And the saline water, we use also drainage water, saline water in Egypt and in Syria to grow tomatoes. And also we tried that in cherry tomatoes in Malaga in Spain. So saline water can be used really to grow crops, and also we tried that in chickpea in Syria. The ICBA, or International Biosaline Agriculture Center, they actually managed to produce barley with 15 decimals per meter saline water, and pearl millet also was 15 decimals per meter. And also they have been able to produce fodder for livestock and also some pharmaceutical plants with up to 30 decimals per meter. Also, you could use that drainage water in sequential way, that you could apply the water first on the least sensitive, the most sensitive crops first, then you collect that drainage water, apply it to more tolerant crop, and then collect the water and apply it to a more tolerant crop than the one before, and until you come to a more saline water in the sequence where you can actually apply to halophytes before you dispose of that water. In our work in India, we have found actually there are other sources we could actually use from distillery, and there are so many, about 630 distillery in India, and also brewery, and we use the water of Kingfisher Beer Factory for irrigation, and also sugar mill effluent from sugar industry, and we use that for irrigation. And this is example of really using the wastewater coming from the sugar industry. It's clean water. It just needs really a minimum treatment to be used for irrigation. And also that water could pass on different filters and then end up in fish tanks. And the fish tanks actually can also can be used if we take the drainage water of the fish tank and irrigate it. We can also produce more crops. And there is a paper here, won the ICID best paper in 2017, where we demonstrated that the drainage water coming from fish ponds can actually produce a better yield than even the fresh water itself. Another thing we used is to increase the supply of wastewater is to use the treated wastewater, especially domestic wastewater for small communities, and by having a system that's a portable system with the help of Danish companies called Grundfos, we're able to produce containers, and these containers actually can treat the water, and then that water goes to drip irrigation system. And this is really what you see as shipping container, but inside that container you have this purification system where the water is treated inside, and even if it's industrial, there is ferric hydroxide to treat any heavy metals if needed be, and we use that water for irrigation. And the water really comes after the treatment clear enough and of good quality to be used. Treated wastewater has been used for olive trees and also for fruit trees in so many countries. And our colleagues in ICARDA, they looked at the yield obtained by irrigating with wastewater compared to groundwater, and really you can see there is a more benefit in using wastewater because it has so many nutrients, so you get a better yield and you get more benefit compared to the cost. Improving water use efficiency is another way to deal with water scarcity, and especially irrigation, because it is using 70% of the water, freshwater resources. It is really important to improve its efficiency. And efficiency goes from the reservoirs all the way to the field, where during that over the reservoir you have a lot of losses by evaporation, and until it reaches to the field you have the transport. During the transport you have a leak, and also you have evaporation as you go down to the field. So we need really to produce more crop per drop. And here is example from near Wallingford, and a farmer has been using floating solar panel to reduce the evaporation of the reservoirs that he is using for his farm and for his also dairy product section of the farm. Also, this is example here from California, where they actually put solar panels on top of the irrigation canals, and by this you minimize the evaporation rather from the irrigating canals across the state. And also lining is also important, and also detecting leaks is also very important to increase efficiency. Also, we need to select the most efficient irrigation system. Sprinkler irrigation is one of the efficient systems. However, it irrigates between the plants. The dry areas between the plants actually is also contributes to losses, because that water will evaporate and the plant is unlikely to use it. Drip irrigation, especially the subsurface, is much better than sprinkler, because you don't irrigate the dry areas between the plants and the water just goes straight to the root zone. And here you have a list of the efficiency of the irrigation system. And of course, in water scarce regions, you would really go for the most efficient irrigation system, which is currently the drip irrigation system. Water use efficiency can be affected by factors like the wind, for example, and the center pivot here system, where you can see the effect of the wind. And now there is more efficient system where they avoid the losses by the wind effect by having the nozzles very close to the surface of the crop, or even some of them below the surface of the crop, and you actually minimize the losses of water by spraying on top of the plant. And also here for the sprinkler irrigation system, it is the same. You can see here the wind effect. You have high evaporation rate, and on the other side you have a sprinkler drip irrigation, where you have subsurface tubes where the evaporation here is minimum. Also, we managed to get some farmers in Mauritius to adopt the drip irrigation instead of furrow irrigation for their sugar cane, and actually you can see they are having a better yield than the classical way of furrow irrigation of the sugar cane. In rice is actually it's quite water consuming crop, and there is a paper actually won by the prize of what's safe of ICID, and where actually there is different ways to cultivate rice with using a lot less water, and that would make it to be more efficient in water use. Irrigation also by drip could be surface, but as you see there on the surface, there are wetted areas would lose water by evaporation, while the bottom actually picture here shows that you have surface irrigation where the tubes are buried at about 6 to 10 centimeter below the soil surface, where you can minimize losses by evaporation. Subsurface irrigation also practiced in Texas in cotton cultivation, and in Australia they have been trying something else where they try to irrigate half of the root zone, and their experiment started by dividing or splitting the roots of any vineyard. One half of the roots goes to the right side of the plastic sheet, and the other half go to the other half. And by this, when they irrigate only one half, then half of the roots only would be irrigated. They apply mild stress. And this is really, they call it partial root drying. So you actually wet half of the root zone and you leave the other half dry, and then next irrigation you do the other half. And this is an example of how they look like with the sheets actually in between, and the roots are split across the sheet. We tried to use that in this idea of the Australians, of the vineyards, cultivation, on actually feed the crops. And we have been actually doing that by using a double drip lines, and the plant is in the middle without having any plastic sheet or digging. And we apply the water to one drip line and leave the other one off. And the next irrigation, we do the opposite. And by this, you only irrigate half of the vertical root zone at a time. And we found actually that subsurface PRD, or partial root drying, is quite a good water saving practice. And here we could actually estimate that we have been, compared to the normal irrigation, PRD would save 26% of the water, and compared to sprinkler, we can save 44% of the irrigation water. And also you can apply PRD on a furrow. When you apply furrow irrigation, you can just allow the water to go into one furrow and leave the next one dry, and apply to the one after, and so on. So you can start by irrigating the odd numbers of the furrow, and then the second time you apply the water to the even numbers of the furrows. There is something else new came to light recently. We call it using nano irrigation. And nano irrigation is a system or a technology that actually slowly releasing small amount of water, continuously moisten the soil, and enabling 24 hours crop irrigation. And this is really using a semi-permeable membrane. Usually it's flat membrane, and it seems to be a promising way. And there's not much really publications about how much water they save in comparison with the PRD, for example. Maybe that's interesting point for someone to do a research on, but it seems to be successful, and it would minimize the labor, and also not to be worried about really when to irrigate and how much to irrigate. So it is really a continuous seepage of water from a semi-membrane based flat tip. Another thing that it has been used in south of Italy is the aqua card. It's like your Visa card or credit card, that each one in the area is allocated a certain amount of water, and then you take that card, and then it would allow only this amount for you, regardless how rich you are or how big the area is. You have certain allocation based on the type of crop you have, and also based on the climate. Another thing is really to improve the water use efficiency is to accurately estimate how much water you need to apply and when. And when we started to look at crop water requirements, we started by using Class A pan, but this is a free water surface. It's not really representing the plants, because plants, they have biological control on how much water they can lose by transpiration. So that was the first trial the scientists came up with, and then we started to move on, and I started to look into this technology, and we have been applying different technologies. One is a scintillometer, ED covariance, and Cosmos, and I'll be talking about that on 23rd of June in the IWF webinar. So you can join in if you would like to know more details. So the first instrument is the ED covariance, which measures directly the flow of the evaporation flow, the H2 flow, through those sensors. And the second technology we used, it was the scintillometry or scintillometer. Scintillometer has got a transmitter and a receiver, and it combines optical infrared with micro radio wave, and we look at the changes actually in the refractive index because of the air density differences, heat and the moisture, and we calculate from that the evapotranspiration actual along the path. So this is really what the ED covariance does. It looks at the direction of the flow of H2O caused by the evaporation. And we have been looking at what actually the scintillometer and ED covariance measures as actual evapotranspiration compared with what we calculate from the commonly used Penman-Monteith modified equation of FAO 56, for which ICID contributed through the work of Rick Allen and Luis Pereira when they were members of the Water and the Crop Working Group. And this is the equation used by FAO and widely used nowadays. And we compare the results of scintillometers and ED covariance. And now you can see from this graph that the ED covariance and scintillometers, they actually measure almost half the value of the potential evapotranspiration computed using the FAO 56 modified equation of Penman-Monteith. So the actual evapotranspiration measured by these equipments actually tells us we are actually over irrigating when we use equations, because these equations are likely to represent the atmospheric demand for water, not really what actually evaporates from the soil and the crop, and which is the crop water demand. So there is a lot of saving if we base ourselves and the crop water requirements on actual evaporation rather than the potential evapotranspiration. Another new technology we used is the Cosmos. That would actually give us soil moisture and soil moisture deficit. And if we know the soil moisture deficit, then we can apply that amount as irrigation requirement. And the Cosmos actually technology can give us large scale 300 to 700 meter radius soil moisture integrated value, and really not reactive, not compared to neutron probe and others. There is no radioactive source in Cosmos. And we have about 52 stations currently in the UK for Cosmos, and we can get real time. So here we have the soil water content in the top as a function of time, and also as a response to the rainfall in the middle plot. And also from that we can estimate the soil moisture deficit or SMD. And if we have the green values, it means that we don't need really to irrigate. If we have yellow, it means we have just mild stress. And if we have red, we have really stress or plant stress that we need to irrigate. So there are some publications here, and there was a press release from Wiley when it was published in Irrigation and Drainage Journal. And there is a new version now where you can have mobile, so you can go with that mobile. It will tell you something about variability and the efficiency of the distribution of the irrigation water across the field. The use of conventional crops is also important, that we use less water consuming crops. We can also use drought tolerant crops, salinity tolerant crops, use a rotation of deep and shallow rooted crops, and also heat and cold tolerant crops, and wild wind tolerant crops. That's also something we need to look at. And also when we have water stressed regions, then we are supposed to use crops that would use less water. For example, here 1 kilogram of wheat could use 1,350 liters of water, while rice it would consume 3,000 liters. So we've got to make the choice according to the amount of water really you have. We tried to grow quinoa and amaranth in one of the EU projects because they are drought tolerant and also salinity tolerant, where we can use brackish groundwater to irrigate, and also they are very nutritious plants. And we tried that in Turkey, and it has been growing happily, and in Italy, and also Morocco, and also in the UK. Although we get also some droughts here in the UK, also we try to see if quinoa can grow here as a cereal crop, and we could use it to produce flour and make bread and cakes like we use wheat. Field management actually is also important for conservation of water. Suitable tillage, conservative tillage, precise input, monitoring systems, agro-environment, wildlife strips at the edge of the field to enhance pollination rate is also practiced here and encouraged by the government. Weed management and the leveling for better water distribution. These are really something would help us. And this is really coming more now into the UK farming community, is to use now mixed actually cropping, that it helps to pollinate and actually to control weeds as well, and increase the yield. And in the conservation tillage, usually we don't really plow the residues of the harvested crop, and we leave it there on the surface because it would reduce the soil evaporation, it would increase the organic matter, and it would reduce soil erosion as well, and it would reduce the agrochemicals, and it would improve wildlife. And also the soil biota would be more active, and the infiltration rate would increase, soil structure would be improved when actually you don't deep plow the soils, and when you use conservation tillage. Laser leveling is also important for efficient distribution of water, especially by sprinkler and surface irrigation. Precision agriculture is also important to reduce the input to agriculture, and we have been really using that in this example from a project in Morocco, where we were using sensors, and the sensors would send the soil moisture sensors would send really a signal to a transmitter to the control unit to open the irrigation system. So nowadays really we have a lot of apps, and most of the tractors now, they have all those instruments and gadgets and mobile apps to help them really to do a bit of farming from their own tractors. And also nowadays they started to use drones to look at the nitrogen need or deficiency for the crops. Some of them, they started to measure the temperature over the canopy, as well as a sign for the need to irrigate or not. And in Australia, they started to use that also to monitor the water quality of the lakes where that water could be used for irrigation as well. Models can be used actually as a good tool for managing water in the crops. And if you run these calibrated and validated models with different scenarios, you will be able to obtain actually what would be the best irrigation system, or the best way to add the water, and to try different method, different time, and to see what would be the impact on the yield. One of them is the SortMed model. It is really free download from ICID website, and you can download that. And also there are some special issues here you can look at later on. It would allow about 20 maximum 20 yields, 20 fields with different treatments or different irrigation system or different crops, any combination you like to study. And it would also allow you to look at the nitrogen fertilizers management and look at whole nitrogen leaching if you are really concerned. And also it would look at open and tile drainage system. And it would look at the rotation as well, up to 20 field rotation. So it will help you to do a lot of scenarios. And also you could monitor the soil moisture. And this is what you can see on the screen when you run the model. You can see the soil moisture, the soil moisture, soil salinity. And if you are running multiple drippers, you can also look at them, the dry matter and the final yield. And if you are looking at what's happening to the groundwater and the level of groundwater with time, if you have a rotation, it will tell you also what the yield in each rotation. And also you can run the salt-made model with climate change scenarios to see what the impact of the future emission on the yield and the crop season length. And this is from a PhD student in Napoli. And here he was running these scenarios on amaranths, and he managed to come with conclusion that with time and according to the climate change, the season would be less by 16 days in the future if he would look at the amaranths, the actual length of the season 114, which is the bottom red line, and with the 2095 high emission scenario, that season could actually be shortened to 98. And if you are using drip irrigation, it means you save 16 days of irrigation by that time. So you can use the models to look at the climate change impact. And here is another thing that we applied for the seawater rise and seawater inundation in 7 sites across the UK. And we have been looking really at the vulnerable sites at the UK and to see how actually the salinity, how deep salinity would go and over which period of time. And here one site, which actually it didn't take that long from 25th of January 2020 to 25th of November, hardly a year, and the top 10 meters were already having the salinity of the seawater, which is 45 decimals per meter. While in another site, from 2020 and 2029, so 1 decade, the salinity didn't really reach that 45 decimals per meter as the previous site, because the prediction of the rainfall of that site was much higher than the prediction of the rainfall of the other site. But also we came with the most vulnerable sites map and what to do about them, and especially most of them actually they are for grazing and cereals. So we recommend that we use a salt tolerant type of grazing like Bermuda grass, and also a different type of wheat and barley that actually can tolerate salinity. There is publication here by the Ministry of Irrigation and of Agriculture and Fisheries in the UK. So we actually, at the end of presentation, we have now covered several approaches to deal with the issue of water scarcity. The only thing really for us is to need to select the right switches. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ragab, for a very good and interesting presentation, giving a lot of details on the ways and means to cope up with the challenge of water scarcity and how to meet challenges in water stress region. Now I'll request Dr. Frank Dimick to give his remarks before we go for question and answer and discussion part. Dr. Dimick.
I had a couple of observations, Dr. Ragab. What number one, just out of curiosity, has there ever been a look at looking at the the fact of increasing drought frequency might be an indicator of future water scarcity problems?
Well, the work we did here in the UK, actually, we predict that there will be increase in the number of drought events. And actually, this is associated with the decrease of the rainfall. And we published actually, I think, a couple of papers on that. So the trend really here, I'm talking about the study that intensively carried out. We actually calculated the number of drought events and the frequency as well is actually on the increase with time from now until the end of this century.
Okay. Another thought that came up as you were talking about rainfall harvesting, using like the rooftop harvesting and so forth. Doesn't rainfall harvesting have a detrimental impact to the environment downstream of the collection points? In other words, if you collect the water that normally goes into a groundwater system or into a river system, doesn't that adversely affect those?
It depends really. In some countries where they don't have rivers, there are so many countries actually they don't have major rivers, and like the work we did in Tunisia, it doesn't really affect any other community. It is more beneficial to have those small mountain lakes because simply there is no really connection at all, and there is no main river in country like Tunisia. And if you look at the Gulf area, the Arabian Gulf areas, there is no rivers actually there as well. But if really you look at the work we did in India, we have completed a project in India recently in the Covri Basin, and my colleagues from ICID head office would know where Covri Basin is. And we looked at the human intervention on the stream flow in the rivers in the area of Brimbadi and so on. And there it has effect. Yes, the flow rate measured actually on those rivers are lower than it should be. And we ran two scenarios, one with no intervention and one with intervention. And it was really quite a significant difference between the two. Yes, it does. In areas where you have rivers, they will not receive any water that has been intercepted by farmers upstreams.
Okay, and a question that would follow on with that, if in fact reduction of evaporation was carried out on a large scale basis, would not this impact future rainfalls and also humidity levels, which actually you reduce humidity levels, you increase crop requirement?
Yeah, of course, that would, evaporation will affect the humidity, and humidity is really quite important as a parameter that would determine the rate of evaporation. I mean, if the air is 100% relative humidity, then it's very difficult to load up more water. So the relative humidity here is really quite important, and I think at a larger scale, it is really important. And I referred to that when I was talking about the cloud seeding, because you are talking about really changing the climate here by cloud seeding, and you spray those silver iodide and so on. You harvest clouds coming from somewhere, and also these clouds could be going to somewhere else, and you are actually intervening with nature and intervening with the climate and intervening also with evaporation and changing the natural situation and there has been a treaty for that following the Vietnam War, because the cloud seeding took place in military context only, and there was a treaty following that, but it didn't really make any reference to the civilian and peaceful type of application of getting rain rather than military purpose. But still, it's really a weak treaty. But its intervention with nature always needs to be we need to be careful about, because it has also impact on the environment, the ecology, mammals, soils. There is actually a study in USA about the long-term impact on the health of people who are subjected to those sprays like silver iodide and so on.
One final question, and then I had a comment or two, but one final question. When saline water is applied to these crops that are saline tolerant, does not this eventually cause a buildup of salt in the soils and make the soils eventually unusable?
Yeah, it's really depends on how you manage the water, because there were two schools on the management of saline water. One was saying you mix the salt water with fresh water, and you apply a moderate saline water, and by this you don't really cause much damage. The other school says no, you apply the saline water at the stage when the plant is salt tolerant, like the vegetation growth period, and you apply fresh water in after sowing and before the emergence, because that's very sensitive period. And that school, they say that when you apply fresh water in intermittent way with saline water, you allow leaching of the salt that accumulates. So that's a different way of managing the water. So there are really two schools about that, and I tended to support the second management of that school, where I would use the fresh water intermittently with saline water, not to allow much build up in the root zone.
Okay, very good. In other words, you basically flush out the saline water by using fresh water. The other observation I had, the concept of precision farming, I really support that process. Here in the United States, I live in a farming community, and the farmers here have used that, the use of sensors and computers to determine, the various, in a large field of alfalfa hay, for instance, they can actually tell what spots need a little bit more fertilization, or maybe even a little more water during the growing cycle to increase their crop production. And it turns out to be a very fantastic system. The farming is computerized. Their sprinkler systems are computerized. Their farm equipment is computerized, and then they can gain so much more production and so much more ability to control the farming by that way. And so very good. The last observation, Dr. Ragab, I think that your presentation has been wonderful. It covered a lot of ground, and we're going to have to go back and read those displays that you provided, those charts and graphs, read them a little bit more carefully to see exactly what they mean. But you brushed on them and you touched on them, and you gave a wonderful presentation. I sure appreciate what you've done.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. My pleasure.
A few questions from our attendees. So I'll read with them then Dr. Ragab, you can give your answer and clarification to those questions. So there are two questions from Dr. Rohit Lal. He is asking which models are best suited for water stressed and water scarce region practicing irrigated agriculture. And in the connected question is how do we protect subsurface drip lines from rodent attacks in the field? There are two questions which are connected.
So how to protect the drip line in the field is one.
Yeah, from rodent attack, and which model is best suited for water stress and water scarce region?
Which model?
Yeah.
Well, models actually for field, there are several models and available for the field. I am aware of FAO Aqua Crop is one model. There is also a model from California Riverside, Hydras 1 and the Hydras 2, and the SaltMed. SaltMed is a model I developed myself. I'm not really biased for my model, but all these models, they have different complexities and they describe processes in different ways. And the SaltMed model especially was developed where salinity is an issue. And actually, I should say that the reason I developed that model, I had a project funded by European Commission, and they were looking at the salinity in the Mediterranean countries and Southern Europe and how to deal with it. So there was really a reason for it. These models, they have different complexities, different processes they describe. So really you need to look at what really you need exactly, and you select the model that you use. The models can be used in different what-if scenarios. What irrigation system? You can apply the model with different irrigation system, different amount of water. And some people actually, they use the models in a very innovative way. Some parameters they cannot measure in the field, like the KC. How many of us actually measure the KC? Most of us, we run into the book of FAO 56, and we get the KC or KCB or whatever, or the salinity tolerant level, and they look at that value and they will use it. And in the reality, I found some people, by the knowledge of the yield, they started to use SaltMed to obtain the parameters they are not able to measure in the field. So the models can be used actually in different ways, more than what they are originally made for. In terms of drip irrigation system, the irrigation systems actually are not all of them suitable for all the crops. So it has to go with the crop. Although I have been told that rice cultivation cannot be really done with drip irrigation, but the Australians are telling me now they are using drip irrigation for rice. So there are certain crops really you might not be able to use the drip irrigation for. So you have to use different irrigation system. And the drip irrigation system, I myself feel happy with in terms of water saving, and I tried it as well myself, is the drip irrigation PRD, the partial root drying method, and subsurface, because subsurface, number one, it would reduce the evapotranspiration from the soil. Number two, actually, if you are using saline water or you are using a treated wastewater, the subsurface irrigation is better because you don't get any contamination to the farmers through the skin or anything, as the water of low quality or treated wastewater actually not handled by hands anymore. So the subsurface irrigation drip in particular could be useful for using low quality water or saline water, because it will keep the soil moisture in the root zone at a higher level, so the plant can tolerate higher salinity when you have too much moisture around it. Basically dilutes the salt because you have always a moistened root zone. So the PRD would also another bonus, that you don't irrigate the whole root zone at once. Plants are able to cope with mild stress. So PRD if done properly, you subject the plant to mild PRD, and usually it doesn't really affect the yield a great deal. So that's my recommendation, really.
Yeah. Another question is by Dr. Sarangi. What is the status of nano irrigation and its cost benefit analysis, if any?
The cost benefits of the drip irrigation and, well, the state of the
nano
state of, sorry?
Nano irrigation.
The nano.
Yeah, nano irrigation.
The nano irrigation is, as far as I know, is gathering momentum right now. But there's how much, because I used nano irrigation in my own garden, and the reason I used that maybe years ago, I used that myself, and the reason for that, when I traveled abroad, I needed to make irrigation system by myself to irrigate, because I grow my vegetables, the cucumber and tomato and so on, for my own salad at home in the back garden of my house. And I used a nano irrigation system to irrigate while I'm abroad. So I have a timer, and that timer would actually switch the water on at a certain time and the stops at a certain time. And I was actually making that half an hour a day. So within half an hour, I would irrigate all the plots of my salad vegetables while I am traveling abroad. So, but how much water that saves compared to PRD or subsurface, someone needs to look at it. So we, as far as I know, I'm not really sure whether we can save much water by continuously irrigating the plants. We need to have maybe a better control if we ought to save water. We need to have some sort of control, and we need to have some sort of study as how much water saving that we save by nano irrigation. And I think maybe that could be a good research for someone hoping to win the What Save Award of ICID.
Good. Yeah. Another question is from Mr. Muhammad Akhtar Bhati. Do you think we should work on crops to evolve low water requirement varieties and water stress resistant?
We need to look at crops really with a low crop water requirements. If you are really in water stretched region and you buy these crops from countries where they have plentiful of water, and this is what they call it virtual water nowadays. So you import virtual water in a form of crops that you cannot really grow because you don't have that much water, and you grow your crops that actually that matches really your available water. So that's really one thing that, and also the management of the crops. There are some indication here in Rosamested station in the UK, is that when you have a rotation, you should have a shallow rooted depth followed by a deep rooted depth crop. And the reason for that, water and nutrients, they travel below the root depths of the shallow crop. And in order to make good use of whatever left the root zone of the shallow crop, you need to follow the shallow crop by a deep rooted crop. Then you can get the nutrients and the moisture that actually left over from the first crop, and you make a good use of it. So there is really indication of that here as well. So there is really a lot of things can be done to cope with water scarcity.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ragab. Another question is from Mr. James Gomez Gani. He is a student, and he is writing that we are learning things that were discovered ages ago. In the presentation, it was stated that the evaporation pen and formula are not accurate. My question is, how are these newly discovered methods and innovations disseminated to the academia so that students are up to date?
So the innovation about the crop water requirements and the estimation.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. Regarding this, he's saying that these methods were discovered long ago, and the FAO 56 and other things. So now, how these new methods are being disseminated to the academia so that the students are up to date?
Well, there are really there are so many methods really that we need to look at, because when we started to look at the crop water requirements, and the question was raised to all of us, when to irrigate and how much water to apply. And that actually was a challenge. And we got through so many equations, Bellinic Cradle, Thornwaite, Turk, Penman, and then Penman-Monteith, and Priestley and Taylor, and all those nice equations by our really meteorological scientists helped us, and they were good for the time they were developed at. However, now we know more, and the technology advanced more. Now we have scintillometers, now we have edicovariance equipment, now we have Cosmos, now we have other really bound ratio, and we have so many instruments now, and the physics and electronics improved quite fast. So that's not the end of it. I mean, there will be a lot of innovation, especially in the area of remote sensing, and a lot of work nowadays happening in the remote sensing to estimate the evapotranspiration on a larger scale even than the Cosmos and the edicovariance. So there is a big room for innovation, and I think my feeling is that as editor as well of the Journal of Agricultural Science of Cambridge, I received a lot of papers from young scientists showing that they have been getting the same yield when they apply 70% of the full crop water requirements. So how can you explain someone added 70% of the total amount of crop water requirement calculated by FAO, and they got the same yield as when he applies 100%? And even some they don't know what actually the reason is, but because the atmospheric demand for water seems to be higher than the crop demand for water. And when you talk about potential evapotranspiration, it is different from actual evapotranspiration. And the crop water requirement should be associated with the actual, not the potential. The other thing, if you look at those equations, they are actually all the parameters in these equations, most of them are meteorological parameters. They are not really crop parameters. So these are meteorological, actually, based equations. And that's why I'm reluctant to recommend these equations, because the biological factors are absent. The only trial was made was by Monteith when he applied the canopy resistance to the equation of Penman. And even that failed to attract the irrigation practitioners, because simply it's parameter difficult to obtain. And that's why the FAO 56, they took that actually canopy resistance of Monteith, and they replaced it by a fudge factor, 70 seconds per meter as resistance in the equation, and they turned the equation to be free of canopy resistance or canopy conductance value. So my feel is that you have a room for innovation to bring a more accurate method to estimate the crop water requirement, and there's really a big room for that to improve, and that's actually a promising way to also to save water, and because I feel we're applying too much water, and also made me to doubt what actually some people they mean by deficit irrigation, because deficit irrigation should mean really that you are applying less water than the actual need. However, the indication and the way that we use the current equation based on meteorological data indicates actually we are not really applying a fraction of the actual need. It is the potential need, and that's why I'm really reluctant to look at someone calling deficit irrigation without knowing based what or deficit relative to what, because a percentage of too much of crop water requirement or a potential crop water requirement, 70% of something too much is also too much. It's not a deficit.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ragab. Now, our next question we are taking from Dr. Paritosh Tyagi. He is asking, is soil sickness experienced anywhere due to use of treated or untreated sewage for agriculture?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, he is saying that is soil sickness experienced anywhere due to the use of treated or untreated sewage water for agriculture? Soil sickness due to use of treated or use of treated or untreated sewage water for agriculture. Whether we have experienced anywhere this soil sickness due to use of wastewater for irrigation.
Wastewater.
Yeah.
Well, wastewater actually it depends how where it actually comes from. The work we did with ICID, for example, in India. We have been using the brewery water of Kingfisher beer to irrigate. We had no problem, and we have been using water of the sugar industry, also with ICID help, and we had no problem really. Domestic wastewater, we used it for small communities with the help of the Grundfos, the Danish company, and we had really no problem whatsoever. Industrial water will be a problem, but there are some really nowadays different treatment for industrial water, but for domestic wastewater, in order to have it safe, really, you need a minimum secondary treatment. If really you want to be safe, I mean, primary treatment may be not sufficient in some cases, especially if you are using salads and so on. And also, you don't use sprinkler irrigation where you are using wastewater, because of course that contamination of the leaves, anything that you eat fresh, like tomato, cucumber, and lettuce and so on, I wouldn't recommend to use sprinkler irrigation. I would use subsurface irrigation for that wastewater. So it is not only the water, but also the irrigation system that you use with wastewater is important. I would really use subsurface drip irrigation when it comes to wastewater, and by this I avoid any contamination, especially if you have to eat actually that vegetables fresh. But I think there is a lot of countries nowadays, they are using domestic wastewater, and I have been listening to FAO recently, a webinar about work they do in Jordan, and it appeared to be really Jordan is one of the countries they are depending mainly on domestic wastewater for irrigation, and so we have really to look at domestic wastewater as guaranteed water resource. It is costly compared to green water, but it is the only guaranteed maybe a water resource as long as we're alive on this planet. You will have to produce wastewater.
Yeah, Dr. Ragab, just I'll add what you have said, that during our visit to Saudi Arabia, we found that they are using almost 100% of their wastewater or domestic wastewater for agriculture, for farming dates and other crops. So that will be good. So now we will take another question that is from Dr. Mohammad Saad Wahad. To what ratio of dilution of saline water can be used in the middle and south of Iraq to cultivate wheat crops and other crops? The dilution ratio for wheat and other crops in Iraq. Your suggestion.
Well, it's very tricky question. Is that because as I mentioned before, there are two schools. One is to dilute the saline water with fresh water, and the ratio would depend on the salt tolerance of the crop and also the stage of the growth. There are some stages the crop can tolerate more than the others. Emergency is a stage where the crops are least tolerant, and also it would affect the number of plants that would survive during the emergency. So the ratio really depends on the salt tolerance level of the crop and the crop stage as well, and its sensitivity to that. The other option, if you could use the water, the saline water with fresh water in more alternating way, then you can use one saline and followed by one fresh and so on, and that would allow you to leach the accumulated salt. And I would recommend that more than to have a mix of these two.
Okay. Now a few persons there are many questions, but we'll not be able to take all the questions for because of shortage of time. So what we are doing, because few people have raised their hand, so we'll give them speaking rights so that they can raise their question, and we request them to be very, very brief, so that they should not go into a very detailed question or detailed comments and suggestion, but they have to be very, very brief. So Mr. Ibrahim Amiri. Mr. Ibrahim Amiri,
Hello.
hello, yeah.
Hello.
You can raise your question. Yeah, you can speak now.
Thank you, Professor Ragab. Thank you for your nice presentation. In your research, you worked on taking field data. Do you like to use the data in a soil water cropping simulation model? I know you work on hydrous model. Hydrous link between soil and water.
Yeah, I don't really work with hydrous. I work with SaltMed, and most of the time, really, I don't work with SaltMed myself. It's I have PhD students and young scientists who are running the model than me. My job with the SaltMed is the development aspect of it.
I understood you prefer to use the aqua model, yes?
No. Aqua model, I referred to models that available. So I was just referring to different models available, and I mentioned that models they have different complexities and they have different processes, and the equations used in each model to describe the same process are different. So when you pick a model to use, you have to look at which model suits your need, and also you look at the data and to see if your data is sufficient for one model or another. So that's really what I meant to do. I'm just saying it now to be clearer for you to know.
Thank you. Please let me know your.
Yeah, now we'll take another speaker, Mr. Marzan Aziz. So we'll unmute him. He is self-muted. Mr. Aziz, you can unmute yourself and then raise your question. he is not there. So now we'll ask Mr. P. Dorji Gamba to, we have unmuted him. So
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, giving me the opportunity. Professor Ragab, thanks for your presentation. It's a wonderful presentation. I got two very small questions. I'm from India. My first question is, you have discussed about the precision irrigation system in your presentation. From Indian context, how you look for adaptation of such high precision irrigation techniques by Indian farmer, where land holding of farmers is very less than 1 hectare, most of the measure of the Indian farmer. One. Second is, like in India, we are getting around 4,000 BCM of rainfall annually, right? And how you look, how India should go forward to use this available natural resource of 4,000 BCM what we are getting in the country. Thank you.
Well, I think we have been, for African countries, we have been involved in producing low-cost, low-tech drip irrigation systems. And we have been trying that in Zimbabwe, for example, and some other, and South Africa. So we have been really looking at the small households and how can we produce low-cost, low-tech drip irrigation system. And it has been really, I didn't really include that in my presentation, but I do have the slides of that system that I could pass them on to the central office to pass on them to you. But the household, small households is as an issue. And a few months ago, the Egyptian government decided, because of the possible shortage of water that's likely to happen after the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, they started actually to ask the small holes in the Nile Delta to convert to drip. And they are also having small households like the one you mentioned in India. But the Egyptian governments, they started to give loans to be paid on 5 years to farmers to convert to drip irrigation, because I can imagine farmers will not be able to afford that, the cost of the system. But the Egyptian governments, they started to do the lining of the irrigation canals, and they started now to convert the Nile Delta surface irrigation system, furrow and the basin irrigation, into drip, and offering the farmers now loans to be paid on 5 years installments. So there are maybe a lesson to be learned from that, and I'm sure that if really the Indian government is keen, and I remember one of your states, Karnataka, in 2017, the government there actually decreed that no surface irrigation will take place in 2017. And I have a colleague working with me here in Wallingford from India, and he was come to tell me, did you hear the news? And I told him, what news? And he said, no surface irrigation in 2017, it will be only drip and sprinkler. And that's really something that it might come by decree, it might come by intervention due to the drought events, but there are different ways that for small holes, they can move from surface to a more efficient system like drip irrigation system, and with the help of the government in terms of loans and support.
Now we'll take only the last question we'll take, that is from Amali. He is asking, does the nano irrigation irrigate based on antecedent soil moisture or designed to save cost and not specifically water?
So the drip irrigation,
no, he's also asking about nano irrigation.
The nano irrigation.
Whether the nano irrigation is designed to irrigate based on antecedent soil moisture or it is designed from the point of view of cost only, not saving water?
Well, I'm not really sure about saving water because the nano irrigation, it is a semi-permanent, semi-permeable tapes, and they seep the water continuously for 24 hours. And the way that one of my slides, actually, it's coming from a current project co-funded by the European Commission to a lady in Morocco, and she has been doing that work, and there is a website as well for that. And if you look at that, those pictures on the slides, it is really a porous tape and continuously oozing water under the plant roots. And the only way really to see if you can save water is you compare it with a traditional drip irrigation system. And this is something I couldn't really see in the literature, this comparison, as if someone really compared the two systems. Of course, there's a good publicity about nano irrigation because of the name. The name is something new, something attractive to talk about nanotechnology. But when it comes to water saving, I would ask the person who is asking that question perhaps to think about comparing, because I haven't seen really a comparison or anything really published to see if they got the same yield with less water for nanotechnology. I haven't seen that yet.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ragab. With this, we will end the webinar. First of all, I'll thank you for very interesting and informative presentation. And I thank Dr. Frank Dimick for his comments. And I thank all the attendees who have raised number of questions and participated with interest in this webinar. And as of now also, we are having more than 90 of participants present, but at some time there were around 150 participants were there in the webinar. So I thank all the attendees who have attended this webinar. The recording of this webinar will be available on our website icid@icid.org most probably tomorrow, if we'll because it takes some time in processing. So once we process it, and then we'll put it on the website so that who have not attended, they can look into the recording and then go through the webinar, or the entire presentation will also be there along with all the discussion part. So I thank everybody for this wonderful webinar. Thank you, Dr. Rawat. Thank you, Dr. Dimick. And thank you all the attendees. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ragab.
Thank you.
Bye.